Hello and welcome to larachat-live episode 21. This is Eric, and today we have Adam Wathan and Jessica. I already lost it. Mauerhan. What's your last name, Jessica?
Mauerhan. That's good.
Mauerhan. Okay, that's good. Our normal host, Matt, is not going to be here today, and Sean is running a little late. Hopefully he's going to pop in here in the next couple minutes, but we wanted to make sure we kicked off the show right around 5 o'clock. And so welcome, Adam, welcome, Jessica.
Thanks.
Thanks so much.
Obviously, one of the big topics today is going to be talking about testing. I know you two are both real big in the testing area. Adam, you have the new series on test-driven development with Laravel. How's that going, by the way? You're getting close to finalizing that, correct?
Get closer and closer. Yeah, it always every new topic I cover ends up being more than I think. So every time I think I'm 50% done, I'm really 35% done or whatever. But yeah, getting there. So trying to put out new stuff every week, and the response has been really good so far. So.
And now, is this what you're doing now, or do you have a full-time job? What's that look like?
Yes, just working on this full-time, actually.
Okay.
So yeah, lots of time to work on that and a couple other side projects and stuff. So.
And what motivated you to do this? What made you think, okay, I want to do a series on test-driven development?
I think the main thing was just that for me to learn it took a lot of effort and a lot of work piecing together kind of ideas and strategies from all sorts of different communities using different languages and different frameworks. And I just can never really find like a good canonical resource in PHP or in Laravel. So after kind of starting to really feel confident that I had a workflow that I was really happy with and kind of had some ideas, that I felt strongly about, I thought it would be worth trying to put it all together in just sort of one resource that someone could work through and basically kind of get all the info that I pieced together over numerous years from all over the place, just in kind of one sort of canonical place.
So Adam's been kind of doing the talk circuit now for a couple of months. Jessica, what about you? Give us a little bit of background of who you are, what you do. I know you're big and test-driven and BDD as well. Where are you working?
Yeah. So I'm working at a company based out of Dallas called RealPage. They do web applications for all kinds of multifamily housing, so apartments or senior living, that kind of thing. I just started there a couple months ago, and that was when I got introduced to Laravel for the first time. And I actually had an opportunity to look at the preview of Adam's course that he was talking about, and I think it's awesome. I've been doing a PHP for 12 years, and over the past maybe 4 or 5 years, I've been really heavily focused on behavior-driven development and test-driven development. And I've also been doing a lot of conferences over the past 2 years talking about those topics.
Would you mind just taking a little time and explaining the difference between test-driven and behavior-driven development?
Sure. So what I'm talking about when I talk about behavior-driven development is a focus on the user stories and writing typically things like in Gherkin, which is that like given I do this, then I should see this result, that kind of thing. Test-driven development is more on the unit testing side, focusing on the specific, class that you're designing as opposed to the overall function of the software. So test-driven development, you tend to focus on the accuracy of your code, whereas behavior-driven, you're focusing on the suitability for the end user. And I'm actually at Lone Star PHP coming up. I'm going to be doing a tutorial on how to do both test-driven development and behavior-driven development together with a workflow that you can use in PHP. So I'm really excited about that.
So what and this question goes out to both of you. What do you guys feel like some of the bigger challenges are with just testing in general? It could be test-driven development, behavior-driven development, after the fact, writing unit tests. Why do you think there's such a barrier for developers to adopt testing their code and writing the test?
I think the biggest obstacles that I know got in my way were just that most of the stuff that's out there that tries to teach you how to test usually uses examples that are really, they makes testing kind of seem really easy and like really straightforward, because they're usually in very sort of isolated contexts where you're building like a little class that, just, the classic example is like a calculator. You're trying to build like a little calculator class or something. And that's great for kind of teaching the concepts and understanding like, okay, you write your tests first, you see the tests fail, and then, you write the implementation necessary to get the test to pass. But I think a lot of people get hung up when they try and apply that to, real stuff that they're actually working on, because so much of what we do ends up being like plugging together, different packages or external services or all sorts of things that really like make it a lot hairier. In terms of, well, how do I test code that talks to Stripe? Or am I allowed to hit the database in this test or not hit the database in this test? And things just kind of get intimidating if you don't really, have a good strategy on how to apply a lot of these ideas that seem simple at their core to more kind of complex real world scenarios. And I don't think it helps either that a lot of people are working on maybe existing applications that don't have good test coverage or weren't designed in a way that makes it test friendly. So when you go and try and apply this stuff there, it's even harder because there's just all sorts of things that are just getting in your way. So yeah, I think the thing that I've been trying to do is help people learn testing by, instead of focusing on sort of like the isolated unit testing sort of side of things, instead sort of start from a higher level, sort of treating the app as more of a black box sort of approach, where you don't have to necessarily get the, design things in necessarily a testable way as much to make it testable, and just sort of focus on applying those ideas at a higher level and then like working kind of down to the lower level as you kind of get better at it and, start designing your code in ways that makes it easier to kind of take that approach. Sort of almost the opposite of what you'll see in a lot of testing resources anyways.
Jessica, some challenges?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with what Adam is saying. I think another challenge that I have heard from a lot of people is just that they're not working in an environment where testing is valued or even supported. A lot of people may not have a ton of time to work on their own projects. They're just trying to work, on their work for their employer. And if they're not being supported in making testing a priority, especially doing something like test-driven development, they don't know how to fit it in or how to, make a point to their boss about why they should spend time writing what seems like twice the amount of code, taking, a lot of people think, oh, I'm going to have to spend twice as much time because I have to write all these tests. And they just don't know how to do it quickly and effectively and make a point as to like why they should go ahead and do it. So if you're working in a place where it's not a priority, if you don't feel supported to do it, you're not going to do it. So I've seen that as a huge challenge.
I think along those lines, I think that's a perfect topic. I know we do a bunch of consulting work, and when we talk to clients and we suggest potentially writing tests for their code, exactly what you said. What they hear is, okay, you've just doubled my bill. Now you want to charge me more hours so you can, because you want to write tests, just exactly what you said. There's not that support. They don't see the long term. This actually saves you money. There's less risk down the road.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice on how to make that sell?
Well, so for me personally, I've just kind of made it a point to go places where they already are supportive of it. because I fortunately have the luxury of being able to just, choose a place I want to work at where they're already doing testing, or they want to do it. But I think if you're trying to convince someone of the value of testing, there's plenty of good evidence that shows that it doesn't take more time once you get, people trained on how to write tests. And I'm sorry, my daughter just came in.
The nerve of her.
Hey, go find Daddy. Sorry about that. So
Okay.
yeah, I think there's plenty of evidence that shows that testing does not take longer once people know how to test effectively, and that it pays off in the long run because you end up not having to go back and fix all those bugs. The same thing is true of doing behavior testing. People may not want to spend the time up front writing out user stories or, designing the software to work and writing tests for that from the beginning. But it pays off in the long run because you end up finding that you actually understand how the software is supposed to work better in the first place. So yeah, I think if you can convince someone of that, then it'll be a lot easier to get them to embrace it. But yeah, sorry, the kids are distracting me. I'll
That's
let
okay.
Adam
I would say,
chime in.
let's take a moment. Sean's joined us. So, Sean, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you. I finally made it. We had some servers go down and our meetings went a little bit long, so we had to deal with that first and foremost. So yeah, now I'm here. So thank you, Eric, for taking over the lead here, and thank you, Adam and Jessica, for coming on. I wanted to echo. I kind of came in, obviously came in late. I wanted to kind of carry on what Jessica was saying with regard to the code coverage. That's one of the things that I've noticed in companies I've worked at over the years is there can be a fear of launching or changing the code structure that touches a lot of different areas, mainly because they have no idea, they don't have that the confidence that changing this little thing here won't blow up, way off, in some random edge case. So it's good to have that code coverage to make sure that whenever you want to make that little change or a big change or whatever change, you have that confidence in your code coverage that you will find these issues before your customer does or before QA does, and you have security in your launch. That's what I kind of wanted to carry on, but I am a bit out of the loop here and where we're at in the questions and the topic. So Eric, I'm going to pass it back to you, and you lead our way.
No problem. Actually, I'm going to kick it over to Adam. Adam, do you have any advice on, again, the sell to get people to encourage their management or their clients to allow for code coverage, and what would that advice be?
Yeah, I think the trick there is to not ask for permission or to not look at it as a separate activity from coding. You know what I mean? It's one thing to be like, okay, well, we're going to work for a week and then we're going to spend a week writing all the tests for everything we did that week. Like that's a lot harder to sell, right? Because now there's a week where you could be implementing new stuff and you're not. But that's why I think, trying to take like a test driven approach or at least a test early approach is valuable, because instead of having to backtrack, and backfill tests for, X period of time where you're not getting anything meaningful done. If you write, a test for the functionality you're about to implement, well, now you have that test, there automatically. And just thinking about it as like part of programming, instead of thinking of it as a separate activity. I think the biggest challenge is just that it is slower if you're not, if you're not comfortable with it yet, or if you're still learning. So it makes it harder to, just write tests for something that you're working on for a client. If you're worried that, the thing that you're going to test, you have no idea how to test it, and you might lose an afternoon, like trying to figure out a good approach to it when you really wanted to have that feature implemented or whatever. So I think the biggest challenge is just figuring out how to make time to practice it and learn it. You know what I mean? Before you feel comfortable just like really working it into your workflow. So people ask me a lot, like, how do I get started with testing, or how do I make time for testing? And the only advice I can ever really give is, don't think of it as something, that you do extra on top of programming. Think of it as programming itself. I mean, to sell it to clients, you can reframe a lot of some of the ideas, instead of worrying about like, okay, well, isn't it going to take like twice as long to do? Well, every time you're going to release a new version of the software, deploy some changes that you made, if you don't have tests, you're going to spend a bunch of time manually clicking around in the application and trying to make sure that everything's working as expected. When if you did have tests, you could just run like one command on the command line, and even with a slow test suite, know in 5 or 10 minutes that the whole thing is working, and know that you didn't forget to test any different cases or anything, because basically every manual test that you would do, you've captured in a way that you can run it as many times as you want forever till the end of time. So when you think about like the confidence that you can get there, I think it becomes a lot easier to convince people that it's worth the time, as long as they are willing to admit that, yes, we probably should manually test this before we deploy it if we're not going to have automated tests. And then automated tests are of course better than manual tests, so it makes it a little bit easier to argue for it then.
Yeah, that was a point that I wanted to make, is that if you're working somewhere where they're still doing a ton of manual QA, or if you're trying to sell a client on it and they have a QA department, you can point out how much time you're going to be able to save with having more automated tests. And I think a lot of companies are starting to really embrace a lot more automation with continuous integration and continuous deployment. And you can't do that without tests. You have to have tests. So why not do the tests in the first place and do test-driven development? It's just easier. So that's an argument I would make.
Yeah, I have to be honest. I've been coding PHP for a long time, and I still struggle to get in the mindset of writing tests, because I get very antsy. I want to create a product, and I want to hurry up and get to the finish line. I don't want to have to test to make sure the finish line is going to be there. I just want to get there. And
see, the way that I view it now, after doing it for a couple years as pretty much the only way I write code, is that I don't know what the finish line is until I have some tests describing it. Because I'm going to write my behavior tests first to figure out what exactly I want the software to do, and then write the unit test to make sure that it's actually doing that.
It's funny, because when I learned a couple years back, I was learning Rails, and I actually started learning Rails through a course that did it through test-driven development. And because that's the way I learned Rails, everything made sense. I'm like, this is how I learned to do Rails, so it makes sense to do these tests. And for some reason, I struggle to translate that to my PHP development, even today. Now, my hope is that you'll get your people learning PHP or learning Laravel, and they come across Adam's series, and that's how they learn to do development, is through test-driven development. But for myself, I don't know why I struggle so much with it, and I've been watching Adam's series on it, and I'm like, oh man, this makes so much sense. And like you said, once you understand a lot of the basic premise of what you should be testing for and how you should be testing, especially with the test-driven development, when you really don't even have code yet, you're just kind of defining the groundwork of the code you want to build. It does become more intuitive, and I'm just as guilty as probably a lot of developers out there of just not drawing a line in the sand and saying, okay, I don't do any more development without writing tests first. So with that said, I know, was there anything in either one of your two careers that took you down this path? Like, was there any pivotal moment where you said, okay, test-driven development really requires my attention. I'm going to prioritize this part of my development workflow because I see the value of it? Or was this a natural progression. I mean, did Grumpy Programmer take you guys in the back alley and beat it into you, or did you just come to it naturally?
I think for me, I just kind of, when I sort of discovered it and started learning what it was, it just sounded like such a utopian sort of environment to be working in, where you could easily verify that everything that you've done is working. You know, and there's all these purported benefits of how it's going to help you write better code because you're getting feedback from your tests. And it just sounded like so appealing. And it's like, wow, I really want to learn how to do this, because it just sounds like it would make, you know, easier or more fun, or really make me a better programmer. And I just kind of chased that for forever until I started to finally feel like I had a handle on it. And, you know, I'm still learning new things about it every day. So, yeah, I don't think there was ever a point where I really like thought, oh, you know, I don't think tests are important or anything like that. To me, it's just when you first start learning about it, it really, at least to me, and maybe for a lot of other people that have a similar personality, is it just sounds like so awesome. You know what I mean? It just sounds like something to aspire to. So yeah, that's kind of the only thing that really drove me. It just sounded like it was really going to make, you know, my day-to-day work and my workflow just more enjoyable, and it just sounded like a really rewarding thing to get good at. So
Yeah, I had a pretty similar experience where, you know, I spent years just being a, you know, programmer. Like I think a lot of people are, where, you know, you don't focus on testing. And then I got a job at a company where my manager wanted us to try this new thing he'd heard about called behavior-driven development. And, you know, I had to learn BHAT and how to write these tests and how to write the user stories. And we were trying to rewrite an application that basically nobody at the company even understood how their own application worked. And we had a really short time frame to do it. And my boss kind of put me in charge of learning how to use this tool and how to do behavior-driven development and, you know, fix that communication problem between the people who, the management who wanted the software to work a certain way and the programmers who were trying to write it. And then from there discovered unit testing, and it made sense to me. It just, you know, it made a lot of sense, and I really quickly saw benefits from doing it myself and with the, you know, small team of people that I had there. And then once I started talking to other people, like at user groups and at conferences, and teaching them how to do it as well, it really clicked and just became like, this is such a better way to write software. And in 2 years of doing that, I think became, you know, 200% the programmer I ever was before. I definitely have seen that I write better code now that I do test-driven development, and have learned a lot more about actual software engineering, not just writing code, you know? And so that's part of the reason that I like to evangelize it to people, is just because it changed the way that I worked and the way that I thought about software.
So I have a question. I mean, so what the question I have, it kind of relates around, there's already a code base that's started. There is no test. We were talking about like how a developer could get into it, and you guys said just do it. It's not to paraphrase it a bit. So I'm curious about if you have any advice. So let's say we've got the code base, I'm a developer on it, and I'm going to say, you know, I'm just going to write a test. But because of the way the architecture is written, I can't really write tests. I'm blocked because of the way something works. Maybe the statics, or calling new class name, or not using best practices. How do you guys have any advice on how to kind of handle that, or are those items actually testable, or like what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to jump in because that's a situation that I've been in several times. The thing that I've found that works really well is if you're working with an existing code base that you feel is not, you know, easily unit tested, to start with behavior tests first. And then once you have behavior tests that you feel are actually, describing how the software is working right now, and you either want to add something or fix a bug or whatever, you can either rewrite the code so that it is unit testable and using those best practices, like, maybe not using statics or whatever. And while you're doing it that you have coverage from the behavior tests, so you're not breaking a bunch of other stuff. There are a lot of ways to test that stuff that is harder to test with tools like Mockery is good for testing, new instances of stuff. And there's classes, for unit testing, the actual functions in PHP like time and that kind of stuff that make those mockable, basically. But I would definitely start with the behavior tests first so that you're not actually breaking the end functionality, which is the biggest concern when you're working with an existing code base like that.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I think the best way to start is to start from as high a level around the application as necessary to be able to test it. And if that means writing just Selenium tests that work in the browser and setting up a staging environment that you can run those tests against, then you can test any application that way. In theory, it's not going to give you as good feedback when things fail or things like that, or give you sort of the design feedback that you hope to get from TDD necessarily either, but it'll at least give you some sort of regression coverage. The thing that I would add is that a lot of time it's hard to find time to go and like add a whole test suite of that sort of tests to an existing application. Like, so if you're in an environment where maybe like people don't value testing as much, it's going to be hard to justify going and doing that. So what I recommend to people instead is to not worry so much about trying to get test coverage around everything that's already there. And instead, if you've decided, okay, from now on, I want to have tests, well, then the very next thing that you need to write, like the very next feature you need to implement, write a test for it before you implement the feature. And that's going to be hard. It's going to be hard as hell if the application is not designed in a way to make it easy for you to write the test, but you're sort of just paying that price from not having it there from the beginning. But if you do that, it's going to be hard to get the first test in, but that's going to make it 100 times easier to write the second test. And you're just going to find yourself kind of making these necessary changes that you need to do to make things a little bit more testable. And anytime you have to go back and maybe fix a bug in some existing code, write a test that covers that bug. And you'll sort of see the teeter-totter go the other direction over time. Like, a lot of the uncovered code will slowly start to become covered just from going back and adding tests when you need to touch that code. And then all the new stuff will, have tests as you go. But I'm not going to try and downplay like the amount of effort that it takes to add tests for something in an application that hasn't been designed in a way that, makes it doable. But if you're committed to kind of getting that testing stuff started, then you have to start somewhere. And the best way to do it is to just sort of, cut the cord and decide, okay, well, this feature, we're going to write a test before we implement it, at all costs by any means necessary. And over time, it'll just get easier and easier. And every change you make to the code base to make one piece, easier to test is going to make the next piece a little bit easier to test. And you'll just eventually find yourself getting to a point where it's a lot more doable, but it's definitely hard work.
How do you feel about the philosophy of one approach I try to take with my team was as bug tickets are filed and as trouble tickets are raised for an application to write tests to identify that issue and then get the test to pass. Do you feel that's a okay approach, or do you think by that time it's too late?
I think that's the right way to fix a bug, because if there's a bug in the system, that means that you didn't have a test for it before, right? It was something that slipped through, which I find even when you're doing test-driven development, it's hard to imagine every possible thing that could go wrong and write a test for it in advance. So the next best thing to do is to write a test that demonstrates that bug and then just get the test to pass, and then hopefully you fix the bug. And now you know that that bug's never going to appear again in the future either. So I definitely think that's the right approach.
Cool. So let's shift gears a little bit here. We're talking a lot about testing. We'll probably get back to it before the show's over. But just curious, Adam, the whole video series that you're doing, was this something you're comfortable with going into? Did it? What's that been like? Like, have you found it challenging? Has it been rewarding? It seems to take a lot of time just in planning, preparation, getting everything ready. What's been your experience with doing the video course for Laravel TDD?
Yeah, it's been fun. It's been a lot more work than I expected. Developers are inherently bad at estimating things. So you think something is going to take you maybe 3 months to do at most or something. And, I've been working on this since July now, and now it's February, and I still have a bunch more content to get through. But it's been good. I'm learning a lot even as I go. I sort of intentionally tried to tackle some sort of hard situations and hard problems, which has forced me to kind of come up with strategies for how I would handle them and then teach those as I go. I definitely haven't tried to, sneakily dodge any of the hard areas or anything to make myself look better or anything like that. But yeah, it's been good. The hardest part was probably trying to come up with an example application that I thought was going to cover all of the sorts of concepts and stuff that I wanted it to cover. So that took a lot more time than I anticipated, just kind of working through figuring out, well, what are all the features this thing is going to have, and trying to put it together in a way where it really made sense as like an actual product, because I wanted it to seem realistic. But I feel pretty good about what I landed on there. I had a lot of help from a lot of friends, a lot of people probably getting annoyed with me pinging them all the time, second guessing, every decision and stuff like that. But I'm pretty happy with how it's going now. And now it's just a matter of continuing to crank on a bunch of the videos and stuff and get through some more of the features and topics. So, yeah.
Question for you. This is one that we also asked Jeffrey Way at the last show, which I ended up asking him is, what did he have any like teaching background? Because when I was watching the larachat video for the first time, I thought, man, this guy must have, his mother or father must be a teacher who was able to pass this knowledge down. Or is there anybody that has enabled you to understand how to teach these topics better, or has it just been trial and error?
Yeah, I think just kind of trial and error. And I think it's something I've always enjoyed. Like, I remember even as like a little kid when we got our first computer, I remember like waking up at like 6 a.m, working on like this Doom walkthrough that I was trying to write for like Game Facts when I was like 9 years old or something. You know what I mean? I've always loved kind of like documenting like how to do something and trying to teach things. So, yeah, I don't know. It just kind of has been something that I've gotten okay at, over the years. Done a lot of screencasting and stuff, even in other areas that I'm interested in. I used to record lots of screencasts when I was recording bands for a living, showing people how to edit drums, when they're recording, a band and stuff like that. So getting into the screencasting and programming was pretty natural. But yeah, no, I didn't have anyone teach me how to do it or anything. So I'm always trying to get better at it. But yeah.
I'm also curious about when you write your, let's say, a script or an article, book, whatever it is that you're trying to teach. And same thing for you, Jessica. I know you do a lot of, like you'd mentioned, the conferences, the talks, and so forth. How do you guys kind of plan for 5-10 years down the road with regard to your topic? So, I mean, PHP. What if PHP doesn't exist 10 years down? Actually, that's a horrible example. That never happens. But like, how do you keep in mind that this is relevant today, but may not be relevant in 5 years, or do you just focus on the now?
I'll let Jessica can go take that first.
Sure. Well, so for me personally, most of my stuff is, talks at conferences. So I'm really just focused on, um, you know, what is happening right now. Like I used to have a symphony talk, and I don't use symphony anymore because I went to a place where we use Laravel. So I don't do that talk anymore. I'm really not up with symphony now. Like it's improved a lot since I was doing that talk. So my stuff is a lot more for just educating people, for what they're dealing with at the moment. I do have like a talk that's language agnostic, where it's just about here is how to do TDD and BDD for object-oriented programming, regardless of which language you're using. So that one obviously is going to be a lot more valuable down the line, for whatever language, as long as you're doing object-oriented. I can't grasp functional programming for some reason, so I stick with object-oriented. I've definitely found that since I started doing the talks and, I plan my talks out pretty well in advance and rehearse them a lot. I've found that I understand those topics a lot better. And they improve each time. So a lot of people have asked me how they could get a better understanding of some complex topics. And I've told them, try and give a talk at a user group, just ask your user group if you can give a half-hour talk or even just a 10-minute lightning talk on a topic that you feel that you kind of understand but need to get better at, and preparing for that is going to give you such a better understanding. I think that anyone can, with a little bit of practice, be able to give a talk like that and teach someone else something that they don't know. I know that in the tech community, imposter syndrome is a huge problem. So I think everyone should be encouraged to go and try and give a talk or teach someone something. I mean, even if you don't want to do a talk, if you just go, you can participate in the conversation, and it'll make you better at what you're talking about, and it'll make other people around you better programmers as well. So yeah, sorry, I got a little off topic there, but yeah. So I to answer the actual question, my talks are usually a lot more just focused on either PHP or language agnostic, and those ones will, be a lot more useful later on. But yeah, I'm focusing a lot on PHP as it is now.
Yeah, I try not to worry about like trying to come up with something that's going to be perfectly timeless or anything like that. I think it's hard enough to come up with a good presentation or blog post or whatever without worrying about that. So yeah, most of the stuff that I've done has also been like, I'm sure there's a bunch of stuff that I've done that has, some elements to it that are going to be relevant forever, but it's not something that I aim to do. I'm not trying to write the next refactoring book or whatever, something that's going to be relevant forever. That's kind of a tall order. But yeah, just trying.
If it's going to help someone in the next couple of months, it's still useful.
Yeah.
If you can help someone with the version of whatever framework that's out right now, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
So the good news is this is larachat live. There is no off topic. That's one of the benefits here. I got a question for you, Jessica. I think you're probably, of the four of us, newest to the Laravel ecosystem. What's just been your impression in general? Are you enjoying it? The Laravel framework? Are you finding testing easier, testing more challenging? Just general coding with Laravel? Do you do coding with Laravel? Are you just like a boss person now telling other people how terrible their coding is?
Well, I hope that none of my people would say that I tell them their code is terrible. That would make me feel awful. Yeah, so I did get promoted into management at my new company, and I still get to write code, maybe half as much as I used to. I focused a lot on the tests and the infrastructure related stuff. So I don't think I've actually written any Laravel specific code yet. I have found that I really like the testing tools for Laravel. Like I read a great article on testing the facades, and found that really useful. And as I've had to do code review of my people's tests, You know, I've found lots of good resources. I've also found that whenever I have had a question, you know, like if someone comes to me and says, I can't figure out how to do this or test this, I've found it really easy to get answers from the community. And that's something that I really like. You know, I was able to go in a chat room and say, hey, does someone know how to do this? Or I'm getting this weird error. And and I got lots of responses. Twitter's also been pretty useful, you know, for when I get stuck on something. So I think the community is really great. And I think that the framework is definitely designed to be test friendly. So I think that's really great. And like I said, we're using Adam's course, and I think it's amazing. So I can't wait to see the rest of it.
Yeah, I early bird that in. I think the first day he opened it up, I bought it. I watched the first couple of lessons, and I sent him an email like, Adam, I need to buy this for all my consultants. Is there a team package I can buy? I mean, it was like it was just that impactful to me immediately when I saw that. I could see the benefit already, and wanted to make sure I got that in everybody's hands. So, Adam, I got a question for you. With Laravel Dusk as part of 5.4, any opinions on that? Were you involved with that? And what is your general feeling with how Taylor treats testing within the Laravel framework?
Yeah, so I didn't like work on it at all, but I did, you know, talk a lot with Taylor as he was working on it, and he'd bounce all ideas off me and stuff. For anyone who doesn't know, Dusk is like a new testing layer in Laravel 5.4 that is meant to be sort of a nice API on top of a sort of Selenium-driven kind of browser testing, which you can use with either like a Chrome driver or Phantom.js or anything like that. And the underlying problem that it was designed to solve was, you know, how can we easily write kind of end-to-end tests for things that have important JavaScript that we need to run? Because prior to Laravel 5.4, we were using like the Symfony DOM crawler component and stuff like that. So you could still write tests that were like, visit this page, fill in this field, and submit this form. JavaScript that was important for that page to work properly, it wouldn't run because, of course, it wasn't a real browser environment. And, you know, more and more, we're all adding more and more JavaScript to our apps these days. So it started to become sort of less useful to be able to write those sorts of tests and not have access to any JavaScript stuff. So I think it's a really interesting addition. I think it's a great place for people to start with, maybe if they've never tested anything before, because it gives you that sort of black box approach where you can just focus on learning how to sort of define what your expectations are and automate those steps instead of kind of getting overwhelmed worrying about like, oh, how do I isolate this from this external service, or, you know, how do I use Mockery properly in this case, or do I need to write an adapter that goes around this layer, or, you know, all these sort of more paralyzing decisions that can really get in the way when you're just trying to learn. I also think it's really, really valuable for, I think of it almost as more of like a QA automation tool than like a TDD tool. It's really useful for trying to sort of write automated tests that replace the sort of tests that a human would do to kind of verify that, yes, the system is working as expected, kind of walk through some really important paths and stuff like that. But you're not going to get great feedback from your tests when they fail and that sort of thing. You're not going to know like, what logical error did I have here? Instead, you're just going to get like, the page didn't render, you know what I mean? Because you had some error. So I don't think it is ever going to replace testing at even the HTTP level directly, or testing, you know, with more isolated unit tests on the inside. So I think it's, I don't think it's really designed to replace anything that we had before. It's more just like an awesome addition to what we have, and kind of expands Laravel's ability to kind of take charge of some of the testing responsibilities that you kind of have when working on an application.
One of the questions I wanted to ask was with regard, and again, this is going back to, well, I guess all of us, because we're all involved in our local meetups and conferences and so forth. Adam a little bit more with his video series and so forth. How do you guys deal with imposter syndrome? I know we all suffer from it. I don't think I've ever met a developer that doesn't suffer from it. I'm curious about your guys' thoughts.
I don't have a good answer for it. I think what helps is to talk to people and understand what other people have to teach you and what you have to teach other people. It's easy to get kind of worked up and feel like you're the worst developer in the world and don't know anything if you really just keep to yourself. Because you know, even on Twitter, like developers on Twitter is similar to the sort of effect that you see of like your friends on Facebook, where you're seeing a lot of highlight reel stuff. You know what I mean? Someone's sharing something cool that they figured out how to do. You're not seeing like what that person doesn't know how to do. So every single person that you meet, you're going to know something that they don't know or have experience with some tool that they've never used, and they're going to have the same thing to offer you. So it can be tricky to deal with, but I think what really helps is to just, you know, talk to other people and share what you're working on with other people and see what other people are working on instead of trying to like stay outside and just kind of observe, because I think that makes it a lot easier to stress about it and feel like you have no idea what you're doing. I think the other thing is that most of us don't have any idea what we're doing. That's what I've embraced anyways. Instead of feeling like, you know, to me, imposter syndrome for me isn't that, you know, I feel like I don't know what I'm doing, but I actually know more than I think. It's more that like, I don't know what I'm doing, and all these other people that I think they know what they're doing, well, it turns out they don't actually know what they're doing either, and we all kind of feel like we don't know what's going on. So you're in the same boat as everybody else.
Yeah, I've got to say, running a local user group, first thing, one of the more frustrating things to do is to find speakers. Our local user group here in San Diego, the PHP one, we have over 1,000 members. I think we're up to like 1,100 or 1,200 members. And just finding 12 members a year to step up and do a talk is this monumental challenge, and it shouldn't be. But I understand where people are coming from. And even despite saying, listen, you don't need to be a subject matter expert on anything you're talking about, just talk about things that interest you. And I was just as guilty. Like, I never had any intention of standing up and talking in front of people. I was perfectly fine not doing it. But as one of the organizers of the group, you kind of get put into that role. And I have found that I learned so much just standing up there, talking through, you know, a topic that maybe I'm not an expert in, but I set aside some time to do some research, get some data, and do a talk on, and then getting that feedback. I feel like it makes me such a better developer. Just getting the insight from other people, it's just great.
There's two things that I think are really important to kind of help fix this problem. One is to just go ahead and try it. Like I was saying earlier, go to your local user group and just try and give a short talk. Do a 10-minute lightning talk, and just get yourself out there and try it. You'll see that there are a lot of people who want to learn from you, and you'll learn from them as well. The second thing that I think is really important is that when you are going to your conferences or groups or wherever, give people feedback on their blog posts. Even give people feedback, because you can help them not feel better that they know what they're talking about. I remember when I went, like the second or third conference I did, I got super nervous all of a sudden and just like completely bombed my talk. And someone that I really admired came up to me later and they were like, "Hey, that was really good. You know, you obviously know what you're talking about. Seemed like you were a little nervous, but I thought it went really well." And that was just really reassuring to me to know that even though, you know, people knew I was nervous, they still learned something and they, you know, thought that it was a valuable talk. So if someone has taught you something, tell them that you appreciate it, and then go ahead and try and teach other people too.
I can't. So I just said, all this hype stuff. I still can't get to the level of feeling confident enough to talk at a conference. Because in my
I feel
mind,
nervous every time. I feel
Yeah.
nervous every single time. And I just, try and find some people who are paying attention to me and I talk to them. I look at the people who are looking back at me and talk directly to them and just pretend we're having a one-on-one conversation. And the nerves go away. But yeah, I know people who've been doing it for years who also get nervous every time. But it's worth it.
I want to know from Adam. I remember we were at that Seattle PHP conference and I watched you do actual live coding in front of everybody. I don't think you made a mistake. I can't remember who I was talking to, but somebody afterwards were like, "Oh my God, I can't believe we just did live coding at a conference." Wow. Like that seriously strikes me as someone who doesn't have imposter syndrome to go up and code in front of everybody. And
that's a Laracon 2015. The guy walked up there. I think he had like 2 slides in the terminal, and that was his whole talk.
It's almost like an reverse imposter syndrome, or like a different flavor of imposter syndrome. I have a much harder time trying to come up with a talk where I go up on stage and try and talk about abstract higher level concepts, or try and convince people of some certain way of doing something, or try and motivate people or whatever. Like, I can't do that. I don't feel qualified to do that. But what I do feel qualified to do is work through some problem that I've worked through in real life and show some people how I solved it and share anything that I thought was kind of interesting about it. So when I do the live coding stuff, that's all I'm really thinking about in my head. Is it's like, okay, well, I like to program, so why don't I just go up there and, walk through a problem that I think is interesting and some, interesting ideas I had around solving it. The other sort of secret weapon to live coding is to have tests for everything that you do. It's so easy when you can run your tests after every single change you make, because you very quickly catch stupid things that you do, like syntax errors or whatever. And that happens to me in every single presentation that I do with live coding. There's always at least a handful of times where I get an error that I did not expect, but I can go and fix it right away because I know that it's there. The real danger is when you code for 10 minutes with no safety net and something goes wrong and you have no idea how to trace it back. And now you're standing in front of 500 people, which, makes it even harder to collect your thoughts and figure out how to go and find the original problem. So the tests are great because a lot of people like to see tests anyways, because it's something that they're interested in getting better at. So it looks like you're doing something more advanced when really you're just trying to save your own ass. So yeah, that's kind of been my thing lately. I really enjoy just going up and programming and walking through live stuff. I sort of developed a reputation for being the guy who does that, and it's worked out well because not a lot of people do it. I find it easier than giving a regular, more traditional talk, and people seem to enjoy it. So it's kind of been a win-win for me and for everyone who's come out to check out the talks.
So I feel like you just gave myself and whoever else is listening a new nightmare of live coding and then not being able to solve the problem in front of 500 people. I'm getting a little bit sweaty thinking about it. Oh, good God. So we're coming up near the end of the show, and as we've been talking, I started wondering how many times we said the word test, and I feel like somebody's got to be able to have the ability to write some kind of script that can listen to this podcast, pick out the words test, and then come back with a number and say that it was 50, 500, etc. That would be an awesome thing to find out. Because I'm not going to go back.
Great drinking game too.
Yeah, I'm not going to go back and listen and pick out and count all the words. That's. But we've got some community questions from the people on the Slack channel. One of the people here, Anthony, he's asking about testing in teams. So obviously when it comes to teams, there's a lot of communication that goes across the board. Obviously, you don't want to have redundant tests and so forth. What kind of suggestion do you guys have to handle communication in that aspect?
So sorry. So the question is about trying to, like, you're writing tests for your code in a team setting, and you're trying to figure out the best way to make sure that people are doing it kind of in the same way, or?
Yeah, more so like you're writing a test for an area that perhaps another team is responsible for. So part of your code touches their area. So there needs to be communication of when I write my test that creates a post,
Sure.
a blog post, and that's the responsibility of another team. But so your test is now relying on their code behaving that way. So when they go and change it and don't tell you, now your test is broken.
Okay, so a couple of elements of it. The first one I would say is that I don't have a lot of great advice on generally that sort of communication thing, because my work experience has always been in agencies and consultancies where I've maybe been working with maybe two other people at most on a project. So um, it was very easy to communicate. I've never really worked in an environment where there's kind of disparate teams and sort of their own silos. But in terms of just making sure that your stuff still works when someone else changes something that you don't control. Um, to me, that's the same sort of problem that you get when you are writing code that has to integrate with some external service. And you want to know that yes, my code actually interacts with Stripe correctly, for example. I think it's just very valuable to at least have some set of integration tests to let you verify that your integration is integrating correctly. Those aren't the only tests you should have, of course, but if that's the sort of thing that you're worried about, then it's very useful to sort of treat the other code as sort of a black box and make sure that you're getting the end result that you want and not worry about testing that you're interacting with that code correctly. More so that the outcome that you get from interacting with them is the outcome that you would expect.
Do you see yourself ever getting to a point, and this goes to either you or Jessica, do you see yourself getting to a point where you start to actually select external services based on how test friendly they are?
I think we, as developers, probably do a lot of choosing of external services based on how developer friendly they are, which usually means the more developer friendly services are more test friendly too. That's why everyone wants to use Stripe instead of authorized.net or something. But yeah, I definitely try to take it into account. There's still some things that you're never going to be able to really integration test against with an external service. So in those cases, you just have to make other sort of considerations in your design to try and mitigate that risk in different ways by either keeping that code as thin and isolated as possible so that you sort of know, hey, when I change this class, I'm aware that this doesn't have any test coverage, so I should probably verify that this still works manually, sort of thing. But as long as you can kind of keep all that stuff sort of in its own small little corner and not littered throughout the rest of the code base, it shouldn't be very frequent that you have to really, have any anxiety about that being a problem. But yeah, to answer the original question, I definitely prefer to use services that give me some sort of sandbox, for testing. Stripe is a great example of that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Cool.
this is something that I've talked about in a couple of the talks and like a couple of blog posts, is not tying your code to a specific service. So making sure that you're writing an adapter around your integration so that if you need to change something, it's easier to change it. It also makes it a lot easier to test because you have a layer at which you don't have to do that actual integrated testing. I agree with Adam completely on everything else that he said. You are going to have to do some integration testing, but it shouldn't be the only kind of test that you have. I choose third-party services based on, how easy they are to use or what features they provide. But I also like to look and see if it's something like, if it's an open source thing, can I look at their build and look at their tests? Because I want to make sure that they're testing their own code too. And in terms of the working with other teams, that is a situation that I have been in a couple times. And yet you have to do good integration testing, and you want to make sure that both teams are doing their unit testing, and following things like semantic versioning. If that's what you're doing, making sure that their API maintains backwards compatibility. So it's a lot easier to enforce that when you guys are all in the same company than when you're dealing with a third-party service. So it's actually, I think, easier than just generic third-party service that you don't have any control over.
Yeah. On that note, I actually need to wrap up the show. We're at the top of the hour here. Had a little bit of a, technical difficulties. I was a bit behind. Eric had a server problem he had to duck out for. I want to say thank you to Adam and Jessica for being strong for us while we had to duck out and deal with our problem. I guess that's where we should have written some tests before we got on the show. Anyways, thank you guys for coming on. Thank you, Eric, for helping me host the show. We will be back in 2 weeks with Jason McCreary, the creator of Laravel Shift. So if you guys have questions for Jason, please get them in on the Larachat channel, on our Twitter, Larachat Slack. On that Twitter note, we also have our February GitHub giveaway contest. The hashtag is larachat-live. Yes, we're that predictable. So again, thank you so much, guys, for coming on, and thank you everybody who is watching live and will watch the podcast following this. Thank you, guys. Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks, Eric.